Titanic, the story of the ship believed to be unsinkable. Imagine the world more than 100 years ago. There was no internet, no television, airplanes were only beginning to conquer the skies, and the primary way to travel between continents was aboard enormous ocean liners. To people of that era, these ships were true marvels of technology, symbols of progress and wealth. Then, at the beginning of the 20th century, a ship appeared that was meant to become the pinnacle of human achievement. Massive, luxurious, and incredibly modern, it was hailed as a masterpiece of engineering. People believed it could withstand almost any danger the ocean had to offer. That ship was called the Titanic. Yet only a few days into its maiden voyage, it would end up at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, and its story would become one of the most famous tragedies in the world. The story of the Titanic began long before its first voyage. At the start of the 20th century, fierce competition existed among the world's largest shipping companies. Each sought to build a vessel larger, faster, and more luxurious than its rivals. The creators of the Titanic chose to impress the world not with speed, but with size and comfort. When construction began, people came to watch the shipyard as if it were a tourist attraction. The enormous steel framework gradually rose above the city. Workers labored day and night. Thousands of people took part in building the ship. When the Titanic was completed, it captured the world's imagination. Its length measured nearly 270 meters. To put that into perspective, if the ship were stood upright, it would be taller than many modern skyscrapers. But its size was not the most astonishing feature. Inside, the ship resembled a luxurious hotel. There were grand staircases with elegant wood paneling, expensive restaurants, a swimming pool, Turkish baths, a library, and even a gymnasium. First-class passengers enjoyed accommodations that could impress even the wealthiest people of the era. After touring the ship, one journalist remarked, "It seems this ship was built not to cross the ocean, but to live on it." On April 10, 1912, departure day finally arrived. Thousands gathered at the harbor. Some were saying goodbye to relatives, others waved farewell to friends. Many came simply to see the largest ship in the world. As the Titanic slowly pulled away from the dock, countless eyes followed her. No one suspected that some passengers were seeing their loved ones for the last time. The people on board came from every walk of life. Millionaires, entrepreneurs, engineers, artists, sailors, workers, and immigrants dreaming of a new life in America. Each had a story. Young couples dreamed of a happy future. Businessmen planned new ventures. Families hoped to find a better life across the ocean. For most of them, this journey was meant to be the beginning of a new chapter. The first days passed peacefully. The weather was excellent. The sea appeared remarkably calm. Passengers strolled along the decks, socialized, played cards, dined in elegant restaurants, and enjoyed the voyage. At the same time, however, the ship's wireless operators began receiving messages from other vessels. The messages warned of large numbers of icebergs ahead. Such warnings arrived repeatedly, yet the Titanic continued traveling at nearly full speed. At the time, this was not considered unusual. The captain was an experienced seaman, and many believed the massive liner could handle any challenge. Then came the evening of April 14th. The weather seemed perfect. Ironically, that perfection would prove dangerous. The sea was so calm that no waves formed around icebergs. Normally, sailors spotted icebergs by observing the waves breaking around them. That night, there were no such waves. The darkness was nearly complete. The temperature continued to fall. Shortly before midnight, the lookouts noticed something directly ahead. At first, it was only a dark shape. Moments later, they realized the truth. A massive iceberg stood directly in the ship's path. The warning bell rang on the bridge. The crew reacted immediately. The helm was turned sharply. Orders were given to alter the ship's course. Everything happened within seconds, but the ship was simply too large. It could not change direction instantly. Then came the scraping sound. The iceberg brushed along the starboard side. Many passengers barely noticed. Some felt only a slight vibration. Others continued playing cards. Some were already asleep. At first glance, the collision seemed minor, but beneath the waterline, the situation was catastrophic. The ice damaged several compartments of the ship. Water began pouring inside. Soon the ship's designer performed calculations. The result was terrifying. The Titanic was doomed. She would sink. When the captain was informed, he reportedly stood silent for a few moments before beginning preparations for evacuation. But another problem quickly became clear. There were not enough lifeboats for everyone on board. Today, this seems almost unbelievable. How could the world's largest ship lack sufficient lifeboats? The answer was simple. Safety regulations at the time were outdated. Large ships were considered inherently safe, and lifeboats were viewed merely as temporary transportation until another vessel arrived. No one imagined that such a giant could sink completely. Passengers were instructed to put on life jackets, yet many refused to believe they were in danger. Some even joked about the situation. Others did not want to leave their warm cabins for a cold night in a lifeboat. The first lifeboats left only half full. People simply did not understand how serious the situation was. Meanwhile, the bow of the ship continued sinking deeper into the ocean. It became increasingly clear that something terrible was happening. Anxiety spread across the decks. There were tears, there was fear, there were farewells. Husbands said goodbye to their wives. Parents embraced their children. Many understood they were seeing one another for the last time. One of the most famous stories from that night involves the ship's orchestra. The musicians did not rush to find places in the lifeboats. Instead, they continued playing. Survivors later recalled how the music helped maintain calm amid the growing chaos. Imagine the scene: a dark ocean, an icy wind, a great ship slowly sinking into the sea, thousands of people on deck. And somewhere in the midst of it all, music continues to play. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, the situation became critical. The bow was already deep underwater. The stern began rising into the air. Objects inside the ship slid across the floors. Furniture shattered. Windows broke. Then something happened that almost nobody expected. The enormous hull could no longer withstand the strain. The Titanic broke into two pieces. The bow sank first. The stern remained above the water for a short time. A few minutes later, it too disappeared beneath the surface. At 2:20 a.m., the Titanic was gone, but the tragedy was far from over. Hundreds of people found themselves in the freezing ocean. The water temperature was about -2 degrees Celsius. In such conditions, a person loses strength very quickly. Survival was almost impossible. Those in the lifeboats later recalled hearing the desperate cries of people in the darkness. The sounds continued for a long time, then gradually they faded away. For many survivors, those cries became their most haunting memory. A rescue ship arrived only hours later. By then, the ocean had already claimed most of its victims. Out of more than 2,000 people on board, only about 700 survived. The rest perished. The world was stunned. Newspapers everywhere carried headlines about the disaster. People could not believe that the most advanced ship of its era had vanished during its very first voyage. Investigations soon followed. Numerous mistakes were uncovered. Too few lifeboats. Excessive speed. Warnings that were not fully acted upon. Insufficient preparation for such an emergency. Yet there were also stories of remarkable courage. Stories of people who gave up their places in lifeboats. Stories of crew members who remained at their posts to help passengers. Stories of musicians who continued to play despite knowing death was inevitable. Decades passed. It seemed that the Titanic had disappeared forever into the depths of the ocean. However, in 1985, researchers finally discovered the wreck nearly 4 kilometers beneath the surface. The ship lay broken into 2 sections. Many objects had been astonishingly well preserved. Dishes, clocks, shoes, personal belongings. They served as silent reminders of the people whose lives became forever linked to the tragedy. Today, the story of the Titanic continues to fascinate millions. Why? Because it is more than the story of a ship. It is a story about humanity's confidence in its own abilities. a story of how technology can appear invincible, yet nature can remind us of its immense power, a story of fear and courage, of hope and despair, of ordinary people who revealed extraordinary character in the darkest moments. That is why, more than a century later, the world still remembers the Titanic, not simply as a ship, but as a legend that became one of the greatest lessons in human history.